that both of you have agreed to talk with us. We have a whole lot of ground. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to get right into it. Despite decades of negotiations, Israelis and Palestinians remain at an impasse. There is ongoing Palestinian terrorism inside Israel. The Palestinian leadership refuses to engage in negotiations without preconditions and continues its efforts to internationalize the conflict. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu talks of the need of a two-state solution to prevent Israel from becoming a binational state. But he also expresses deep concern for the possibility of a Palestinian state in the West Bank becoming another terrorist entity. Many Israelis believe that the Oslo process and Gaza disengagement, which gave the Palestinians control over territory, have generated terrorism rather than peace. According to public opinion surveys, though, most Israelis still support a two-state solution, although they are pessimistic about the prospects of a negotiated agreement. Both of you, David and Michael, have been intimately involved in negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians. I'll begin with Michael. From your perspective as an Israeli negotiator, what can be done to change the negative dynamic? Can the sides get back to the negotiating table?
So you're asking about what could be done to change the negative dynamics. Let's first talk about the dynamics. And obviously, you don't need to be an expert to realize that we are at a very low point in Israeli-Palestinian relations. I've been in this business for decades. I believe I'm the only Israeli who was in all the negotiations with them for the last 23 years, and I don't remember such a low point. Yes, we had suicide bombers, which was lower in terms of security, but still, the prospects for negotiations collapsed after the failure of the last round of peace negotiations in 2014. We had a violent round in Gaza. Gaza is in dire straits, very bad situation. And rather than investing in risk construction, they are trying to redig tunnels and rebuild their arsenal of rockets. The Palestinian Authority is as dysfunctional, weak as I can remember, with the Palestinian leader, Abu Mazen, now 81 years old, talking about leaving the scene and having lost lots of legitimacy in the Palestinian society. Opinion polls indicate that about 2/3 of the Palestinians say he should leave. Not that they have an alternative, they can't point out who should replace him, but it means that they don't feel that he delivers for them. Whereas for us Israelis, we have been subjected for the last 6 months now to a wave of terror, stabbings, car rammings, firearms used against Israelis. More than 30 Israelis lost their lives in this wave of terror. We do not see the end of it. It is carried by young people, mostly teenagers, who are connected through social media, and they act on hatred and incitement. And if you follow what they say in social media, many of them post before they go and stab a Jew. It is a sense of deep frustration with their own existential situation. It is not only frustration with Israel, it is frustration with their own situation, their own society, their own leadership, coupled with the psychological need for self-fulfillment through what they perceive as martyrdom and heroism. They don't mind losing their lives. They say so. They say, let's meet in heaven, or in paradise. I want to join the parade of martyrs, things like that. They know that they stand a good chance of losing their lives, yet they go and do it. And on top of this, we have a clueless international community, especially the US, facing this grim situation. And since it is now election year in the US, this paralyzes a lot of the political initiatives that might be out there. And looking at the region, when you see a lot of it up in flames and melting down and so on, you see Daesh, the Palestinian issue is totally marginalized in the regional picture. At the same time, I strongly believe that this phenomenon of ISIS, of Daesh, has an impact on the atmosphere also in the Palestinian society. What I call the banality of violence, the banality of death, also infiltrates the Palestinian society as well. And while most of these young people do not swear allegiance to ISIS, don't go and fight with them, they are certainly influenced by this atmosphere, and some of their terminology reminds you of what you hear or read from ISIS. So this is, of course, a very bleak picture. There are some bright spots. There's still security coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which thwarts certain terror attempts. We have a strong and resilient society in Israel. We have some Arab potential partners who share our concerns about the region and are willing to cooperate with us not only in security matters but also on Israeli-Palestinian matters. So there are some things that go in our favor. I believe that the first thing that needs to be done is to end this wave of terror, quieten down the situation. It's a challenge because it's not that simple to deter a young fellow who's ready to die. So how do you deter him? So there are all sorts of ideas in Israel, like destroying their homes or expelling the families and so on. But I can tell you from our experience in the second Intifada, it is not that simple to deter such people, and we have not only to think in terms of specific deterrence, but also in terms of how to change the atmosphere. And that's very challenging. There's a lot of incitement out there. The general atmosphere is that one incident feeds the next one. People want to emulate their friends or other people that lost their lives and follow them. It is a very challenging situation. I believe that we need an additional set of security measures, but alongside these measures, we need to think about political initiatives that will change the atmosphere, and I'm sure we'll discuss them throughout this session.
I want to get back to direct bilateral negotiations, but before I did that, you touched upon the current violence, the current Palestinian violence, and I want to understand what the thinking is here. So the Palestinian Authority and the PLO are inciting violence. They're creating an environment that is conducive to these kind of attacks, on the one hand. On the other hand, the security cooperation, which is vital, continues. What is the thinking behind these two tracks? The incitement, which creates an environment where you've got really people ready to kill themselves and kill others, and the security cooperation. Can you explain?
First, what is it that motivates these young people? Secondly, where is the Palestinian Authority on this? And thirdly, what could be done? I think that if you really want to analyze what motivates these young people, and I've been really focusing recently on the social media, what they say in Arabic, because they post things on Facebook and other social media before they go out to stab Jews, and you can follow their line of thinking and psychology. It's not a one-dimensional picture. People tend to single out one element and say, it's because of this. Some people will tell you it's because of the lack of political horizon, no negotiations. Some people will tell you it's because of incitement. It's because of a lot of things. It's not only one element. All of them are there, and let's put them in order. First, I believe these people vent existential frustrations. They feel that it's not only frustration about the lack of political horizon, it's about their own situation, their own society. They are disappointed with their own leadership. By the way, they never mention their own leadership on Facebook. They don't refer to them. To them, they don't exist. And these people, they say things like there's nothing to live for. It's like a black and white picture where they don't see any hope. And their leadership, as far as they are concerned, does not provide any hope for them, no solutions, no statehood, no unity, no governance, nothing. And coupled with a stalemate between Israelis and Palestinians, this is a source of frustration for them. Secondly, there is a psychological element of a general atmosphere where it is very to go out and try and kill Jews, and you become a hero, you become a martyr. As I say, they are not afraid to die. They say so, and they go out and do it knowing that they will die. Then there is an element of course, long-term education to hate the Israelis, to hate the Jews, incitement, which is, of course, extremely relevant to this picture. The fact that they decide to vent their frustration with Israelis is because of this incitement, because of this hatred that they grow up on and so on. That's quite clear. But the bottom line is that in order to deal with this situation, it's not enough to focus on specific deterrent measures. You have to think about some other additional elements which will change the atmosphere. One way to start thinking about it is that the Palestinian society today is split about this wave of violence. It's not that they think ethically it's wrong to go out and kill Jews. It is that they think it's useless for their youth to die. And in opinion polls, about 50% in the West Bank think that this is futile and they're against it. So how do you translate this split picture into something that will change the atmosphere? I think it's certainly a challenge. As concerns the Palestinian Authority, as I understand it, is they don't know how to deal with this phenomenon. They will not condemn it publicly, even though we pressurize them and the international community pressurize them, because it's very unpopular in their own society to go against what they call resistance. So they will not criticize this publicly. In some cases, they even encourage it, like Abu Mazen sending letters to the families of these young people who went out to kill Jews and met their death. I think that's definitely incitement to violence, something that should be stopped. It's quite clear. When it comes to security coordination between their security services and ours, this continues unabated, but this deals with attempted terror attacks or planned terror attacks. When there is information about terror attacks which is identifiable, you know who is behind it, who is planning it, and you can stop that, there is coordination between us and them. There is a continued cooperation because it's not in their own interest. But the PA is irrelevant in terms of its security apparatus to stopping teenagers from going out and stabbing Jews. You don't have early warning in most cases. There's no clear address. It's not a top-down phenomenon. And the leadership is irrelevant. Even if Abu Mazen issues a call on these young people to stop violence, they will not listen to him. They don't care about him. They don't count him. In their calculations, their leadership doesn't count.
David, on the issue of violence, I know that Hamas is working very hard to try and get these young people who, while they're encouraged by an environment but seem to be acting largely independently, to get them to turn into something more organized and to have the PA or the Tanzim, Fatah youth get involved in the fighting in a more organized manner. What do you think the likelihood that this violence, as horrible as it is, explodes into something even worse? You see that in the cards?
Look, we have to all be humble a little bit. Not too many people predicted what's been called the intifada of individuals. It's interesting that it's coming from the teenagers who weren't even born, some of them, or maybe were toddlers during the second intifada of 2000 to 2004. 4,000 people were killed. 3,000 of them were Palestinians. So it's interesting that the older people, although someone will find me an exception here or there, for the most ones, by the way, people with job permits usually over 26. The 26 and over people are not doing this. The 15-year-olds who have no memories to draw upon of how devastating the intifada was are the ones engaged in this. So I think we all need a sense of humility that no one predicted this intifada of individuals would take off. And I think Mike is right that this is this is something that social media is certainly encouraging. Khalil Shakaki, the leading Palestinian pollster, just told me in Ramallah, he said, I don't know what is in America or in Israel, but I assume the numbers are comparable. But he said, 86% of Palestinian teenagers get their news from social media. So if people over 50, the number is something like 10%. So we're seeing a whole different generational paradigm. What's remarkable to me, though, is that everyone talks about Israel's startup nation and this, and Israel is able, when it came to the war in Gaza, when someone could be on a fourth-story walk-up and they'll get a text from the Israeli army, please leave this thing, go two miles away where it's safer because we're about to bomb this house. So somehow the technology is able to find these people, when Israel's about to attack. I gotta believe there are, savvy tech Israelis, and maybe in this audience, people who are thinking of how do we do different messaging on social media to find these people, not just when there's about to be an attack in Gaza. So I think the social media factor is a new X factor, and that leads us to be somewhat humble that we can make clear extrapolations. Right now, as of today, this thing is not catching wildfire. And I think part of it is the Israeli army, I think, has handled this with a lot of skill and finesse. They have not done what they did during the second intifada, which is take over cities, cancel all job permits. They said that would only fan the flames, and I think that's smart. Is Hamas going to try to make political capital? They definitely are. But right now, as the chief of staff said publicly at the INSS, the leading Tel Aviv think tank conference, I was there in January, where he said, look, we don't get any advance warning on this. There's no cell that is organizing it. It is spontaneous. It is leaderless. And so while I'm sure there are people fanning the flames that would like to kind of ride the tiger, so to speak, right now that isn't happening. This thing has gone on much longer. No one predicted this would happen, and it's gone on longer than people thought it would. So I don't see it flaming out right now anytime soon. By the way, I didn't say as introductory, it's a delight to be on a panel with Mike Herzog, who I really think is a national treasure of Israel, and his knowledge, encyclopedic and analytic, and he's really devoted himself professionally to this issue. It's an honor for me to have him as a colleague at the Washington Institute. And of course, it's great to be with you, Leah, as well.
Let's shift gears. Let's talk about negotiations and where we are and how we get back to them. The U.S. and Israel are on the record that direct bilateral negotiations are the only way to promote Israeli-Palestinian peace. Others have argued that since everyone knows what the final outcome will be, the U.S. and other world powers should impose that outcome on the parties. Do you think that an imposed deal would be implemented by the parties, David?
Look, the issue is, I think, a very live issue. I don't think there's been a formal debate yet inside the administration. But as someone who was involved in the last effort, some people out here know that I like sports, so I tend to go for sports analogies. 3 times the United States has tried to hit the home run ball. Clinton in 2000, Condoleezza Rice at Annapolis 2007-8, the effort I was a part of 2013-14. The odds are when you try to hit the home run ball, you're much more likely to strike out. I think it was a noble effort to try, given the stakes, but having done this now 3 times, and knowing that these two leaders, Netanyahu and Abbas, are very risk-averse, I don't see the value. And I know that we're heading, as Mike said, into a succession period. And being in Ramallah, that's what they talk about now, is succession. Abbas is 81. He smokes a pack a day. He doesn't have a vice president. Usually in succession, in many countries, certainly among the Palestinians, they look over the right shoulder, not the left shoulder. So I don't see in this period who's going to emerge. And there's no elections right now because Hamas in Gaza is afraid Fatah will win. Fatah's afraid Hamas will win. And Abbas is in the 11th year of a 5-year term. And basically I see a situation that the election at least legitimized his presidency in 2005, as did a functioning parliament. You don't have that. So given all that, it's more likely, I don't know if it'll be a collectivist leadership, it'll be a protracted, messy situation. I don't see who's the leader there that's going to take tough decisions. So, and I know from the effort I was involved in, what we call the 5 for 5, which was, the borders, the issue of security arrangements, refugees, Jerusalem, and mutual recognition. Do you accept the character of the other side's state? I feel we were close on 2 of the 5. More on the borders that Netanyahu will publicly take credit for because of his coalition, but he did more than many Americans, American Jews included, was willing to do. And Abbas did more on refugees than many American Jews was willing to do. But it's about 5 for 5. And on these other 3 issues, you could try the front door, the side door, the back door, the window, the basement, the chimney. We didn't want to say because the Americans didn't think out of the box, things were not tried. I think it's gotten very hard to see, at time of succession, risk-averse leaders, and also that the Arab Spring's backlash has meant we see a meltdown of states. And that time, it's hard to see that countries are going to take more security risks. They'll probably take less. So the question is, if the 5 for 5 doesn't work, what's the likelihood of getting it together? So then you're going to see a whole effort, and that's Leah's question. Well, maybe say, look, America's tried 3 times to persuade. Maybe now you impose. And that is where I think Europeans, many, not all, would like to see this go, maybe in the twilight zone of this administration, which tends to be from November to January, after an election, but before an inauguration of a new president, where there's no political dimension in the same way. And you saw this happen twice already. You saw the US-PLO dialogue started in the twilight zone of the end of the Reagan administration. You saw the Clinton parameters on a final deal during that same November to January. So the trifecta would be November 2016 and try it a 3rd time. But just impose the 5 for 5 if they can't agree to the 5 for 5 on their own.
So do you think the U.S. will do this, impose at either the Security Council or through a presidential speech?
It's hard, I think politicians in any country don't decide things until they have to. So this is a very centralized White House, and I think they're saying it's only March. November is far off, so they'd probably have a blank stare at you. They know about this, but they don't have to decide now. If I had to give it a probability, I would say 80% chance of a presidential speech of like Obama parameters that would tweak the Clinton parameters a bit, maybe not a lot, not be that radically different from what he said at AIPAC in May 22nd, 2011 at the policy conference 5 years ago, but there would add some dimensions on Jerusalem and on the refugees and security maybe. But in terms of going to the Security Council, I think there the odds are a bit lower. I don't know if it's 40-60 or 50-50, but I think this would be the first time the Security Council would deal with this issue really in a very substantive way. It's not that there weren't efforts to use the Security Council. The Jordanians tried, but they didn't even get 9 votes, let alone 15. So the U.S. didn't even have to veto that. But here, the question is, does the United States lend its hand to it? And I think the arguments for it will say, we've tried for 8 years to have terms of reference. We've been knocking our heads against the wall. The best gift to the next administration is that we just do it on our way out the door, and hope that this is some sort of anchor in the water, that the party's politics will gravitate to these imposed solution in the next 5 to 10 years. That's the argument for it. The argument against it, and I must say, you know, I'm willing to be proven elsewise, I'm a bit skeptical that this will work, because I tend to think it'll be more a baseline for defiance. Each side will dig in their heels. The Palestinians will say the Obama administration has to use the words Jewish state. For Israel, or nation state of the Jewish people, we'll say never. And if Israel, you know, it could be that 2 capitals in Jerusalem might refer to Arab neighborhoods in Beit Hanina that no Israeli ever goes to. But the Israelis will hear the word Jerusalem, and they won't say 28 gerrymandered villages since 67. They'll hear the word Jerusalem, and that'll be a showstopper. So the Israelis will say never. And then the question is, what does it mean for a new administration coming in the door? It'll say, well, you know, it ties the hands of the new people because you've shot the final bullet. You've just imposed the solution. And this is really a walk-away strategy for the United States. The American Jewish community isn't focused on this because they're still thinking about the Iran issue, but this will be a big deal. However it turns out, I tend to think, I think it's, like I say, 40-60 or 50-50. Others would say, look, this is not something you want to do when you're going out the door. This is the most consequential move by the Security Council since 1967. This isn't the UN General Assembly, which if Israel says the world is round, you know, they'll say it's flat. It's the Security Council. It has more legal framework significance. So this is a big deal. I don't think that there's a formal debate yet on this issue, but I assume there will be between now and November.
Michael, how would such a resolution, a Security Council resolution, be received in Israel, and what do you think repercussions would be, either intended or otherwise?
Well, most Israelis, myself included, opposed an imposed solution. If the parties do not subscribe to a solution, it will just not work. They will do their utmost to undermine it, to undercut it. And if the international community or the US in that case wants it to work, they will have to make such physical investment that I think is impossible. It just won't work. The parties have to agree to it and want it. An outside party cannot impose it on them. Now, we understand that the US administration is thinking about it because they would like to leave behind a legacy. And this is part of their legacy. We negotiated, we developed a so-called framework document which lays out parameters for negotiating and solving the core issues between Israelis and Palestinians. Let's not throw it away, and let's put it out as our legacy, something that will be hanging out there as a new 242 resolution, and the parties will have to resort to it once they sit down to the table. I think the challenge is that if you try to dictate to the parties the parameters for negotiating and resolving the core issues, given the fact that the parties themselves negotiated parameters for the last 15 years and failed. So you try to bridge the gaps through an external, internationally imposed parameters. For it to have any positive impact on the situation, it has to be balanced. It has to take into consideration both parties' concerns. For us in Israel, it is to make clear that the goal of negotiations and the goal of an agreement is end of conflict, finality of claims, that in the refugee problem, the so-called right of return is off the table because we do not recognize that there is such a right. It is demilitarization of Palestinian state and solid security arrangement. It is recognition of Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people. These are the elements that would necessarily want to see there. And we also know that the Palestinians want to use this tool in order to extricate their terms, their demands from the international community, because they cannot get it from Israel. So via international decision, they don't have to give anything. They just get what they want. That's a challenge. I'm skeptical whether this administration would be able to deliver such a balanced resolution. In these issues, in these cases, you know how you start, you never know how you end. There's dynamics, there are tremendous pressures. There will be Palestinian pressures, there will be Arab pressures, there will be Russian pressures, Chinese pressures, international pressures, and I'm not confident that the administration will be able to withstand these pressures and produce this balanced resolution. And if they do not, then they better not start with it, because it will do more damage than benefit to the parties.
I'll just add, if I could, just on that. It's something called the UN Cuisinart, which is, you know what you put in the blender, you don't know what you get out. And what Mike is referring to here is, look, what the Palestinians want is not a secret. I mean, you know, the 67 baseline with land exchanges, what we call swaps, a capital in Jerusalem. So that is very tangible. The Israeli side, and you know, the U.S. is going to have to hear that side as well, which is to say, but Israel has to be symmetrical, that what Israel gains on the refugee issue and the security issue is every bit as tangible and explicit as what the Palestinians will be getting. It can't be just an agreed upon on refugees or robust security measures. And the question is now you say, well, the U.S. has the veto. If the U.S. doesn't like the language, it could veto it. What Mike's referring to is the kind of the slippery slope thing, is that once you get into these negotiations, it's so tantalizing. But if I could just do this, I could bring the Russians along, because the Russians are very sensitive to what the Palestinians say, et cetera, or the French, you know what I'm saying? So the question is, if someone is going to go down that road, they're going to have to somehow speak, you know, there's going to be skepticism if the U.S. could basically impose the imposition and put forward something that is so terms that it considers symmetrical and balanced that it could carry it. And you just heard from Mike, and from me, where the pressures are going to be very strong to play with the wording in ways that will kind of fudge certain issues that they feel are less significant. And so beyond the wisdom of doing this in general will be the question of the text about how are you giving benefits to both sides equally?
I mean, I'd also just mention and ask you about the international community seems to have forgotten that many of these things that you were talking about have been on offer already and have been rejected by Palestinians. There have been offers. Israel has been willing to make some very serious concessions. So I don't understand really why they think that this would work. That said, I do want to touch on the issue of the U.S. role. The U.S. has had a role. It's established itself as a facilitator of Israeli-Arab peace. It's a role that it's taken on for, years and years, and it's done a very good job in many, with Jordan certainly, with Egypt. Does this undermine the U.S. role for the future?
Yeah. Let me be clear. No one believes this resolution is going to produce a peace agreement the next day. It's all predicated on the idea that Netanyahu and Abbas are not capable people of coming to an agreement among themselves. So it's more like saying, Mike says in terms of the administration's legacy, I'm not in the administration, I don't see it that way per se. It's their view is the two-state solution is slipping away, and you have to preserve the template of that. If not for these people, then the next set of people. I already made clear where I felt I had some skepticism about it, because I think it'll create a baseline of defiance where the parties will dig in their heels. And it has implications for the United States for a new administration, whoever's the next president, which is does it lock us in the United States to basically a walk-away strategy, which is, here, we just told you what peace is. You know, when you're ready for peace, here's our phone number. Call us. And does it really, really limit our flexibility? My general view in the Middle East, whenever it's all or nothing, the iron rule is it's nothing. And we should avoid these binary choices that just really, you know, lock our hands and in a way that we don't have the flexibility to pursue anything from 1 to 100. This locks us in, and that's, you know, part of the problem when we don't have either party. It's not like we don't have the Israelis. We don't have the Palestinians either, because they won't like anything with the word Jewish state or anything like that. So the whole concept is a template that is not focused on tomorrow morning, on Netanyahu and Abbas. It's basically given up on these people, and it's trying to look ahead to their successors more. But I wonder, because we tried the home run ball 3 times, that we need to avoid all or nothing binary options. Anyway, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, but both of you seem to have some ideas on what some of these different options are to maintain the prospect of a two-state solution and to prepare the environment for that. David, I know you just published an article on it.
Yeah, look, this is, look, you can hear from the tone of my remarks, I think that we should try to avoid the binary that you could argue might work in 5 to 10 years, but in the Middle East, a lot can happen in 5 to 10 years. And it could polarize the parties, and, like I said. My view is, what would be the 3 sets of criteria in looking at these non-binary approaches? One is, how do you maintain the viability for a state in the future? How do you keep that door open so when the parties are ready to walk through the door, they can walk through the door? Criteria 1. 2, how do you avoid more security risk? Because Israel will say, look, with the Arab Spring, there's a meltdown. And, you know, the U.S. left Iraq, the U.S. left Afghanistan. You know, now you're saying there'll be another party that's going to come into the Jordan Valley. Syria's in a meltdown, Iraq's in a meltdown, there's ISIS. We don't know if Abdullah of Jordan's going to be around in 5 years. So you need a solution that basically doesn't create a whole new layer of security risk beyond the regional risks that are already there. Point 3, and also I think, you know, you want something to avoid the delegitimization issue. I can tell you I've gone to 121 American campus visits. I might be more than anyone I've met, but in the last few years, and this issue is spreading, and I think it'll continue to metastasize, and I think that you're not going to find one thing that will eliminate the BDS issue or eliminate the sanctions issue, but I think you have to think about what could reduce it. So with these 3 criteria in mind, and also, by the way, you want something that, you know, I would say a 4th one would be, you don't want such paralysis in the binary kind of all or nothing approach that the PA which is weakening, as you heard Mike, collapses. I mean, that's also something. So you need something that I think points to a direction, but maybe might be more like a single or a double than it is a home run. So I realize that's unsatisfying to some people, but I would argue that the comprehensivists have tried now 3 times, and it didn't work. So I would say 2 steps, really, you got to do, which is, one is a commitment by Israel. It doesn't need a Palestinian Authority. It's an Israeli decision. Now, you'd want something, I think, from the Palestinians, if you could, on incitement, but this is not a giveaway to the Palestinians. This is about Israel wanting to maintain itself as a Jewish state, a democratic state. You know, Netanyahu went to the grave of Theodore Herzog and said the status quo is terrible for Israel. And the status quo is going to slide, and it's going to lead Israel to being a binational state. This is not a leader of the Labor Party or the Lapid Party. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think that, you know, that's a factor that leads me to believe not to build beyond the barrier. 80% of the settlers live in the 5% of the land largely adjacent to what we used to call the Green Line. Now, if you include East Jerusalem, the number is 86%. But almost 80% of the settlers, even without Jerusalem, is within that 5%. The settlers are not distributed evenly. And so the thing is to say, well, maybe you could find a way that you don't build beyond the barrier. 92% of the West Bank is beyond the barrier, where a relatively few number of settlers live, but there's still 86,000 on the wrong side. But basically what you want is something that says, I don't build beyond the barrier, but in these blocks, in these areas closer to the Israeli 67 lines, you know them. You maybe have family there. You visited Malay Adumim, Gush Etzion, and some of these places. And even Abbas says to Olmert, 1.9% is going to be Israeli, and we know we have to go up. This isn't the Quran. This is not holy, the 1.9%. So I think the trade-off is you don't build beyond the barrier, but you strengthen those blocks along the border that you know will be Israeli. I think that would suggest a direction, and it would also be consistent with what Netanyahu said at Herzog's grave, which is, I want to be a Jewish state. I don't want to be a binational state. Of course, I want equal rights whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. That goes without saying. But point one. And point two, I think, he's holding out the foreign ministry position for Mike's brother, and Mike isn't here in any political capacity, of course. But also the question of, what do you do with those people on the wrong side of the barrier, so to speak? And I think here, you can't pull them out or anything like that. And the IDF stays exactly where the IDF is. But maybe you pass along the Knesset. If people want to leave on their own, it's their voluntary right, they will be compensated. There's polls that say 30% of these non-block settlers want to leave. So it's not coercive. The IDF is the same exactly where it is. So you don't incur more security risk. You decouple the security and the ideology for the first time. And basically, you point to a direction and say, this might not be a home run ball, but we now have a sense. Now, some people say, well, what do you care if the settlers stay? Let them stay there in Palestine. Great. But the settlers I know talked there said, we want the IDF as a final, status issue to stay there too. So I don't think it's about just wanting to stay there. They usually want to stay there with the IDF. This is an interim period until the Middle East cools down. Right now, the Middle East is an overheat. And so I think you've got to find ways between the 0 to 100 that would point to a direction, leave you the options going forward, and not incur more security risk, and also reduce the delegitimization drive and the sanctions drive that's going on to Israel around the world.
I'll just add that it's some interesting ideas. Certainly not the position of the current U.S. government, and not where the current Israeli government seems to be. I'll also just add that AIPAC takes no position on settlements. But I want to hear from Michael, from the Israeli perspective, what you think of this plan, and is this something that the Israeli government might eventually adopt?
First, I absolutely agree with David that the parties are not ready now for big decisions, and they should not be pushed in that direction. Palestinians are weak, dysfunctional, and as I said, Abu Mazen lost a lot of legitimacy and is nearing the end of his term. And on our side, I don't think the Israeli government is going to take big decisions under the pressure of terror, and I think they're right about that. So we have to look at the picture and identify what modest measures could be taken in order to avert escalation, in order to keep the window open for a two-state solution, and also in order to prevent the collapse of the Palestinian Authority, because if the Palestinian Authority collapses, they will collapse on us. We'll bear the costs, the economic costs, the political costs, in every way. We'll have to run their lives, their health, their education system, their sewage, everything. It's not in our interest to do that. I mean, the whole idea was to separate and not to mix the two communities together. So we have to look at the picture, and it's a multi-dimensional picture, and identify those areas where things could be done to avert escalation and improve the situation. I would focus on several such measures. First, I think we have to continue with the security measures designed at putting an end to this wave of violence. including, for example, and I think there's consensus in Israel on that, we need to complete the security barrier between Israel and the West Bank. We started this under the pressure of suicide bombers in 2002. Unfortunately, we never completed it. We did other things. We shifted to other priorities. It's time to go back and complete it. And on the Palestinian side, put really heavy weight on stopping incitement, fighting incitement, and everything that comes with it. As concerns Israel's settlement policy, I subscribe to what David described to you, namely that Israel can adjust its settlement policy to its stated policy of a two-state solution, so you don't build in areas you yourself say will be are supposed to be a part of the Palestinian state, but you want to do it as against understandings with the U.S. administration that you will continue to strengthen the major settlement blocks, which are also important to Israel's security. The current Israeli government is ready to do it under understandings with the U.S. administration. They've been unable to reach such understandings. If there is a different coalition in Israel, maybe, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see if that happens. The third dimension I would look at is what we call in Israel the bottom-up dimension, namely economic development and resuscitation on Palestinian side. It may sound to you counterintuitive, but our experience shows that when there's more when you offer them more economic opportunities, the incentive for violence goes down. I'll give you just one example. We have today, every day, nearly 100,000 Palestinian workers in Israel with permits. And they've been going on for a long time. And out of this mass, only one or two were involved in terror attacks. Almost all terror attacks, the bulk of them are carried out by people who are illegal in Israel, but not legal workers. And it is, I think, the consensus in our security establishment that we need to encourage and generate more jobs, more economic activities, and so on, even though some Israelis have valid concerns that if you allow more people, maybe you will have more stabbings and more terror attacks. So that's why I say it may sound to you counterintuitive. I think we also have some opportunities in the region because we have some regional actors with converging interests with Israel who are willing to work with us also to provide more space for Israeli-Palestinian relations, and there are some opportunity there as well. And I would also not neglect Gaza because Gaza is a pressure cooker. The infrastructure there is collapsing. They have 6 hours of electricity a day. It could burst in our face, and I think it's in our interest, if possible, and it's very challenging, to reach a long-term ceasefire with Gaza, not a political arrangement, but a long-term ceasefire in Gaza which will allow for speedier reconstruction and fixing their collapsing infrastructure, water, electricity, and everything that comes with this. It's very challenging because the PA, the Palestinian Authority, will not play a role in Gaza. They are afraid to deploy in the passages and play a role, and we're hesitant to go for a separate deal with Hamas. And it is also challenging because the Egyptians are very much against it. They regard Hamas as an enemy, as a threat to Egypt's national security. They accuse Hamas of cooperating with the Muslim Brotherhood. And as you know, Hamas is the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. They accuse Hamas of cooperating with ISIS in Sinai, and our intelligence says that they are correct in accusing them. So it's challenging, but still I would not lose sight of this possibility of a long-term ceasefire. And finally, I think we have to think about transition on the Palestinian side. If Abu Mazen steps down, there's no telling what will happen. We have to think about I mean the international community and regional actors about a managed transition. Bottom line, I think that Israel has to seize the initiative here and signal the direction of separation from Palestinians while keeping the window open to a two-state solution. Whatever we can do with partners, we should do with partners. Whatever we cannot, we should do it alone, because we should not be hostages to Palestinian rejectionism and dysfunctionality.
As the clock is ticking, I have many more questions, but I want to leave time for our audience to ask questions. We didn't even get to the issue of the diplomatic intifada, the internationalization effort of the Palestinians, what they're doing at the International Criminal Court that they've now joined. I urge you to ask about it. If you would like to, please, there are 2 microphones. Get up and line up behind them on either side. Please introduce yourselves, where you're from, and please, I urge you to leave it to a question and not long commentaries so that whoever wants to ask a question can get one in.
We all know that Israel belongs to the Jews, and after 22 years, we've seen that the Arabs don't want to share it with us. So why do you guys and the Israeli government keep forcing the two-state solution on us and not look at annexing the land and taking the $13 billion it costs every year to keep the two-state fantasy going and pay the Arabs $250,000 a family to leave?
Who wants to take that one?
Start on that one, Mike.
Well, I'm happy to answer you. I don't have an issue with the fact that we Jews have affiliations to the whole land of Palestine. It's biblical. We don't have an argument there. The question is in terms of policies today. What policies should Israel pursue? There are today several million Palestinians living there. I don't want to control their lives. I don't want to control them. And I think that if we don't separate from them, what will happen? We will be under tremendous pressure for a binational state. I do not want to be in a position where we Israelis have to choose between being Jewish and democratic. I don't want to be in that position ever. So that's why I think we should pursue separation. Okay, you might call it two-state solution. I call it separation. If they don't want to accept it, we'll continue and do what's good for us. Okay, but at least in the process, we legitimize ourselves, because the issue of delegitimization is a very serious issue. If we have a partner in the future, okay. If we don't, I would not advocate annexation, because I think the cost of annexing is far higher than the cost of not annexing. If the PA collapses and we have to run the lives of 4.5 or 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank, we did work on this in the defense establishment. The cost is unbearable for our economy.
Their polls show that
1 question. We'll take
the money
sir.
to leave.
I'm sorry. You've had your chance.
Great, thank you very much. Aaron Miller from Newport Beach, California. David, some inside baseball question for you. When you're involved in the negotiations, your 3 rounds of negotiations, can you kind of tell us, like a day in the life? You wake up, you're driving to some hotel or something, you're sitting there with a bunch of people from the Palestinian Authority. I'd like to get an understanding of what it was like during that period of time, or those 3 periods of time, that you've gone through those negotiations. And are you having lunch? I mean, what's going on?
As you can tell, I'm not exactly suffering, that way. Look, you're, there's no doubt that what you learn in the negotiations is that, originally I had this image, maybe again, of American sports, of like the Secretary of State picking up a football and running with it 95 yards down the field. But when you're inside, you realize that every step has to be coordinated with the White House. The government, we're in a presidential system, and you need to synchronize with the White House. And you also have to look for that elusive Venn diagram of where is there overlap between the parties on what I call the 5 for 5. We were all focused on that framework. Maybe one day it'll be released, but I think for now it won't be, because we promised confidentiality, and we have to take that seriously. If the parties want to release it, maybe it'll be up to them. But it was very intense. It's probably the most intense experience of my life. And even things like the time difference. You could finish at 4 in the morning. You have to come back if you're in Jerusalem, and you only have classified computers at the consulate. And they're still up in Washington, and the Secretary of State hasn't gone to bed yet. And so it's like you're on a constant. You're always going, basically. I'm Shomer Shabbat, so I could say thank God for Shabbat. But then again, there was a war in Gaza, and in a wartime, there is an element here that people are dying, so there's no Shabbat. And so I came for peace, I stayed for war. But we want to bring dignity to both sides. We want to end this tragedy that's gone on too long. I'm frankly a bit concerned about the delegitimization effort, because next year will be the 50th anniversary. The Jews will call it the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War. But once you leave the organized Jewish community, even American Jews who are not part of that world will say it 50 years of occupation. And I think that's going to create a whole new set of pressures that Jewish organizations in this country have not really absorbed yet. So, I could talk to you privately about all the nice little color stories but the point is the big picture. The big picture is what I care about. And I'm concerned about the trajectory. I just don't believe we could do the grand deal. And that's why I don't want to try to hit that home run ball again and have a fourth strike, if you know what I mean. But I do worry that the violence will keep getting worse. The delegitimization will keep getting worse. Both sides will suffer. We'll just be digging fresh graves, and we'll be left with old problems. So I would rather find a solution that's imperfect, but at least points us in a direction, than leading in this limbo status that I feel is bad for all sides. So that's where I stand. Thank you all very much.
With that, we'll end our session. We've run out of time. Thank you very much, and thanks both of you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.